You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. Well, it's also true that you can't become the largest ethnic nation that's ever existed on Earth without making some enemies. The transformation of Russia from a paltry, meager tribute state on the brink of death to the behemoth that emerged in the past few centuries didn't happen overnight, and there were definitely a large number of casualties in this bloody expansion. Although I've discussed the Russian expansion into Siberia many times, arguably being the biggest demographic change in a given region of the Earth since the European colonization of the Americas, and I even discussed the Tatars and other Siberian peoples that are now a part of the country of Russia today, they were not the only victims of this growth. Thousands of years before the expansion of the Indo-Europeans, a collection of unrelated peoples inhabited parts of Europe, Central Asia, and parts of the Near East. And as to who they were exactly, we may never know, but there are hints of their presence left behind scattered throughout these regions, such as the Basque, nestled in the Pyrenees Mountains, but the largest collection of pre-Indo-Europeans actually lies within the Caucasus mountain range. Parts of the Caucasian region were conquered or loosely incorporated as vassals by both the Roman Empire and their main rivals, the Persians, and hence they have been influenced by both ancient Eastern and Western civilizations. The people of the Caucasus were originally pagan, although through centuries of contact with these previous two powers, their traditional faith has been heavily influenced by both Greco-Roman mythology as well as Zoroastrianism, a monotheistic faith that originated in Persia. Upon the spread of Christianity from Armenia and the Roman Empire in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, many Caucasian natives would adopt a form of orthodoxy, although this was quickly overshadowed by the spread of Islam in the 7th and 8th centuries AD. For a variety of reasons, Armenians, Georgians, and only a handful of small Caucasian peoples retained the Christian faith, while the vast majority of the rest either converted to Sunni Islam or stubbornly held on to their indigenous pre-Abrahamic practices, which we'll take a closer look at later. To the north of the Caucasus were a variety of diverse and often unrelated people who came from places near and far, such as the Alans, who were closely related to the Scythians and Sarmatians of ancient Central Asia, the Kipchaks, who, as we discussed last video, were the cultural ancestors of a wide variety of Turkic peoples, including the Kazakhs, Tatars, and Bashkir, and perhaps most shockingly, there was even a small group of Mongolian Buddhists who settled along the Caspian Sea to the north of the Caucasus, known as the Kalmyks, who are still around to this day, but that's a story for another time. The Alans who settled on the Caucasus would become the Ossetians, a minor people group of the region, while the Kipchaks would become a variety of Turkic Caucasian groups like the Nogai, Karachi, Balkar, and Kumyk, who are actually not very closely related to Anatolian Turks. But in this video, we're discussing the nations that predated these latter migrations and focus on the Caucasian natives, specifically the people we refer to in English as the Circassians, a very ancient culture that need not be glossed over in world history. These Caucasian natives, as mentioned previously, speak a variety of diverse tongues, which can be roughly divided between East and West, and it's actually debated whether they are actually part of the same family or whether they have separate origins because they're so distinct. In the Far East near the Caspian Sea are the natives of Degestan, which is by far the most ethno-linguistically diverse region of the Caucasus, with no group even coming close to making up a majority, with some of the natives of this region being the Avars, Lezgins, Dargins, Laks, Tabassarans, Aguls, Rudals, Tsakars, Akvak, Botlik, Tsez, Bagvalal, Godaberi, and I know that it sounds like I just made up every single one of those off the top of my head, but they're all very real and have quite unique cultures. To the west of the Dagestanis are the Chechens and closely related Ingush people, and to the west of them are the Ossetians, Turkic-Caucasian groups, and the Circassians and Abkhazians. The Circassians were divided between many different subgroups as well, such as the Adig, Kabardians, Abazins, and Ubik, and although their languages have varying degrees of intelligibility and they were divided religiously between Muslims, Christians, and pagans, they did and do generally consider themselves to be of the same nation and ethnic stock. Naturally, this region wasn't always a part of the Russian nation, and the region of Circassia had actually been independent since the 15th century, but during the rapid expansion of the Russian Empire, they found themselves in conflict with the Cossack settlers and later the entire Russian state. In the mid-1700s, Russia started an aggressive and bloody war against the Circassian nation, lasting nearly a century, before the last of the Circassian forces had been defeated and the bulk of the survivors were forcibly expelled from their homelands. The vast majority of these now stateless Circassians would settle in the Ottoman Empire, predominantly due to their shared Islamic faith, although others would go to Persia or even North Africa, with only a minority remaining behind in the newly Russified land. A large number of Russians, Ukrainians, and to a lesser degree Germans and other Europeans settled in the Circassian lands. In fact, in the early 19th century, nearly 50% of the entire region north of the Caucasus, known as Kuban, was of Ukrainian origin, with Ukrainians even outnumbering Russians in the newly annexed North Caucasian republics. However, this very quickly changed after a series of man-made famines orchestrated by the Soviet government caused a large proportion of Ukrainian settlers to starve to death. Many ethnic Ukrainians returned to their homelands after some time, and lastly, and possibly the biggest contributing factor, is that a huge number of Ukrainians intermixed with or were assimilated into the Russian majority, and today, where they once made up the majority, now only 1% identify as ethnically Ukrainian, although an untold number have some Ukrainian ancestry. Keep in mind, genetic studies have shown that there was some degree of intermixing between the Slavic settlers and indigenous Circassians, either during the period of initial settlement or during the Russian period due to their close proximity. One could argue that the position of the Circassians under the Russian Empire was rather similar to that of the Turks under the Ottoman Empire, meaning a large number were massacred and expelled from their homelands, with their diaspora populations being far larger than the number that actually still exist in their mother nations. In fact, the Circassian diaspora in Turkey is so large that it's one of the few communities in the modern day that has a secondary diaspora, meaning there is a diaspora of ethnic Circassian Turks in Germany, the United States, and other countries who had been established in Turkey for generations. The historical situation of Chechnya and Dagestan is a bit different, as the latter was actually a part of the Persian Empire, and during Russia's offensive incursions deeper and deeper into the Caucasus, they actually had many major military victories against Persia, granting them Degestan and parts of the Azerbaijani and Armenian nations. These conquests by the Russians caused another spate of expulsions of Chechens and Dagestanis from their homeland, albeit to a lesser degree than the Circassian exiles, not having the same major long-term demographic changes. Naturally, these Caucasian peoples were not exactly willingly subjugated into the Russian nation, and during the chaos of the Russian Civil War during and after World War I, many peoples of the Caucasus would attempt to unite and form independent republics separate from Russian rule, which actually worked for a short time period until the Russians came back, not as imperials this time, but as Soviets, and these lands were forcefully incorporated once more. During the Soviet era, tens of thousands of Chechens and Dagestanis were deported to Central Asia and other parts of Russia, where many remain to this day, while the indigenous cultures and religions of the Circassians, Abkhazians, and others were repressed. Although since the collapse of the USSR, there has been a strong cultural and religious revival among all these groups, especially the Chechens, who are quite infamous in their demands for independence since the 1990s. The Caucasian folk religions, such as Habsism, which nearly went extinct under communist rule, have since flourished among the Circassians and Abkhaz in their home countries, with there also being Christian, Islamic, and irreligious segments as well, although the practices and mythologies of their indigenous faiths continue to have a major impact on their cultures today. Conversely, virtually the entirety of the Circassian, Abkhaz, Chechen, and Dagestani diaspora in the Middle East is Islamic today, mostly of the Sunni variety, but occasionally Shia, depending on where they settled. And approximating the number of individuals in this community is extremely difficult for a number of reasons, such as the fact that it's prohibited by law to take surveys on ethnicity or ethnic background in Turkey, and in the last census that they enumerated peoples by mother tongue, only 100,000 individuals cited Circassian as their first language. The actual number is believed to be many times more than this, as although only 100,000 people or fewer still speak a Circassian dialect in the diaspora, the number of full or partial Circassian ethnicity likely number in the millions. Due to the fluid nature of ethnicity in Turkey, however, many people of Circassian or other Caucasian origin may instead identify with the group that they are culturally assimilated into, with a massive number of Circassians and Abkhazians having settled in central Anatolia, where they intermixed with and assimilated into the Turkish population, while a large number of Chechens and Dagestanis settled in eastern Anatolia among the Kurds at the behest of the Ottoman government, who wanted to alter the demographics of this region in favor of Muslims and replace the Armenian population. Even further south, there are also lively communities of Circassians in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Egypt, and Libya, where they have all assimilated into the Arab populations to varying degrees. Although it appeared as if the Circassian identity was largely fading after their expulsion, in recent years there has been a strong resurgence in Circassian nationalism, with many wanting to reconnect with their heritage by learning the Circassian language or begin practicing the indigenous Circassian religion, and many have even called for the re-establishment of an independent Circassian state and have returned to their homelands, although it's doubtful that this movement will be successful since they are now only a small minority in most of the traditional Circassian lands. Either way, though, the Circassians, along with other peoples of the Caucasus like the Abkhazians, Chechens, and Dagestanis, are all incredibly interesting and unique nations, so please let me know your thoughts on these various groups. As always, thank you all for watching. This has been Mason, and I'll see you next time.